Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a process that's happening inside you trillions of times a second. We're going to take a look at this ancient, incredibly high stakes biological factory line that is absolutely essential for keeping us alive. So let's get right into it.
Okay, picture this. You're sprinting, really pushing it, or your brain suddenly needs a massive surge of fuel to solve a problem. How does your body get that energy, right now? Especially when you're gasping for air and oxygen is low. Well, the answer is this amazing 10-step chemical process that every single one of our cells has totally mastered. And the name of that process is glycolysis. The best way to think about it is like a microscopic factory. Its entire job is to take one simple raw material, a sugar called glucose, and run it down an assembly line to crank out these little packets of energy called ATP. So what makes glycolysis such a big deal? Well, here's the kicker. It's the cell's only major energy-making pathway that doesn't need any oxygen. This makes it the ultimate survival tool, keeping the lights on when oxygen supplies are running thin. It's so fundamental to life, you can find it in just about every living thing on Earth. So the whole point here, the factory's prime directive is all about one thing: speed. Just take that glucose and, as fast as humanly or cellularly possible, turn it into usable energy. So let's take a walk down this assembly line and see how it works. You know that old saying, you gotta spend money to make money? Well, it turns out our cells figured that out billions of years ago. In the very first part of this process, the cell actually has to invest some of its own energy just to get the glucose molecule prepped and ready. All right, so glucose, our raw material, shows up at the factory door. The first thing that happens, bam, it gets a chemical tag slapped on it using an energy molecule. This traps it inside the cell so it can't just wander off. Then, another energy investment rearranges it, making it perfectly symmetrical. Kind of like positioning a log just right before you split it with an axe. And that's our initial investment. The factory is now down 2 units of its energy currency, 2 ATP molecules. Now, you might be thinking, wait, we're losing energy? But trust me, this is a calculated risk and it is about to pay off in a big, big way. Okay, investment phase is over. Now for the fun part. It's time to rake in the profits. This is where the factory floor really comes alive and the energy starts pouring in. And here it is, the moment we've been building up to. That perfectly symmetrical molecule we just made, it gets split clean in half. And this is huge because it means for that one glucose we started with, we're now running 2 identical assembly lines side by side. Everything that happens next gets doubled.
And would you look at that, as those 2 new pieces move down the line, boom, we generate a total of 4 ATP molecules. 4! Now remember, we only spent 2 to get this whole thing started, so we are officially in the black.
But wait, there's more. The factory also turns out 2 molecules of something called NADH. You can think of these like little high-energy cargo trucks. They're not cash in hand like ATP, but they're packed with electrons that the cell can cash in for a ton of energy later on. Okay, so let's do the final accounting for our little factory. For every single glucose that walked in the door, we spent 2 ATP, but we gained 4 ATP. That's a net profit of 2 ATP. Plus, we walked away with those 2 high-energy NADH trucks. Not a bad return for a process that happens in a flash. Now, you can't have a factory running this hard without a good manager, right? Someone needs to control the speed of the line so things don't just spin out of control. And in glycolysis, that job falls to one very important enzyme. So let's meet the boss, phosphofructokinase 1. We'll just call it PFK1. This enzyme is the foreman. It's the main bottleneck in the whole system. Seriously, how fast PFK1 works is how fast the entire factory runs, period. So what tells the boss to speed up or slow down? Well, it really just comes down to supply and demand. When the cell is running low on energy, a signal molecule called AMP basically tells PFK1 to hit the gas. But if the cell is swimming in energy, high levels of ATP and another molecule, citrate, tell PFK1 to slam on the brakes. It's this beautiful, self-regulating feedback loop. But there's also a secret weapon, a kind of cheat code. It's a molecule called fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, and it is the most powerful activator of PFK1 there is. When this guy shows up, it's like a direct order from the CEO telling the foreman to crank the line to maximum speed, no questions asked. It just plows right through those slowdown signals from ATP. So this factory is amazing when everything is working. But what happens when a critical machine on the assembly line breaks down? And where does that final product, pyruvate, actually go? This is where this biochemistry stuff gets really, really relevant to our health. So imagine a patient walks into a clinic. They're just wiped out all the time. They're pale, and they get out of breath just walking up a flight of stairs. Now, these symptoms could be a lot of things, of course, but they could also point directly to a breakdown in our glycolysis factory, specifically in their red blood cells. The broken machine, in this case, is an enzyme called pyruvate kinase. It's one of the last steps on the line, and it's responsible for a big ATP payout. Now, here's the critical part. Your red blood cells, they rely 100% on glycolysis for energy. They have no other options. So when this machine fails, they can't make enough ATP to keep themselves healthy. They become fragile, they start to break apart, and the result is a condition called hemolytic anemia, which explains the fatigue, the pale skin, and the shortness of breath perfectly. Now, what about that final product, pyruvate? Well, it gets to a fork in the road, and the path it takes entirely on one thing. Is there oxygen available? If yes, it heads into the mitochondria, the cell's main power plant, for some serious, super efficient energy production. But if there's no oxygen, it gets converted to lactate. It's a quick fix that keeps glycolysis going, but it's not sustainable and can lead to a buildup of acid.
And this brings us to something really fascinating and frankly kind of sinister. It's a complete hijacking of the system. You see, cancer cells, they become absolutely addicted to glycolysis. Even when there's plenty of oxygen for the more efficient route, they choose to run this fast, sloppy factory in total overdrive. It's called the Warburg effect. They care more about speed and making new building blocks than they do about efficiency.
And that leaves us with a huge and maybe even hopeful question for the future of medicine. If cancer's whole game plan is to run this factory in a crazy, unsustainable overdrive, what if we could just pull the plug? Can we find a way to starve the cancer by specifically shutting down its power supply? That's not science fiction. It's one of the most exciting frontiers in cancer research today.